China is the future. At least, that's what people say. China is the superpower of the 21st century. It's the largest growing economy in the world, a major player in global politics, and a key driving force in much of modern media creation. But what about video games? China comes up in a lot of conversations these days, but that rarely extends to the world of gaming, and that's because for years, video games have been almost exclusively about Japan, America, and a little bit of Europe. For the last 40 years, these were the only major players in the gaming landscape, but for the first time, that might be about to change. In 2020, MiHoYo's open-world RPG Genshin Impact became one of the largest games in the world, with 23 million downloads in its first week, and for many people, this game came out of nowhere. It went on to become the fastest game on the Google Play and App Store to reach $1 billion in revenue, beating previous record holder Pokemon Go. By comparison, Pokemon Go was the first mobile entry into what is literally the highest grossing media franchise of all time. Pokemon Go was able to take advantage of the nostalgia of older Pokemon fans in addition to its ever-expansive younger audience, and it was the first game to take augmented reality into the mainstream. Really, it was a perfect storm of right place, right time, a kind of mega viral landmark event that only comes along once a decade. And Genshin Impact reached that first billion-dollar milestone in just 2/3 of the time. Any game that is that unbelievably financially successful is going to have an impact on the industry, for better or worse. And this isn't the only time a Chinese game made a major splash in the last 12 months. At the end of August, the trailer for the newly announced Black Myth Wukong got a lot of attention, in addition to 8.5 million views on YouTube and another 34 million on Bilibili, with a lot of focus centering on how a game that looked this good could come from such an unknown developer. Some took to calling it China's first AAA game, but this description isn't correct. Outside of graphical fidelity, nothing about this game is AAA. Its developer has only made one other relatively unknown game. There is no publisher, and the team is modest in size at around 30 employees. Black Myth Wukong isn't AAA, it's indie, and it does look pretty impressive. And trailers for impressive looking Chinese video games are becoming more common. It seems likely that this trend will continue, and sooner or later, these games won't just be trailers. What's more, already existing Chinese games are playing a larger and larger role in online distribution platforms like Steam, with the final week of January 2021 marking the first time in history that both top-selling games of the week were Chinese. And forget indies for a second, what about the big boys? Tencent is the second largest gaming company in the world, trailing only Sony, and their hands are in enough different pies to give the average baker a heart attack. They're the owner of Riot Games, the creator of League of Legends, as well as many popular mobile titles like Honor of Kings, Clash of Clans, and Call of Duty Mobile, and they have shares in many major gaming companies including Epic Games, Activision Blizzard, and Ubisoft, as well as distribution rights to many of the biggest titles in China, as well as non-gaming entities like WeChat, QQ, Tencent Music Entertainment, and more. Many more, actually. Tencent is the highest valued company in China, with stakes in over 600 different companies, and it just keeps growing. So, all in all, when it comes to the global gaming market, it can be said that China has now officially arrived, and the impact of this is only just starting to be felt. With how static the major players in gaming have been since the ascendancy of the current Nintendo, Sony, Microsoft triumvirate, the rise of China might be one of the biggest gaming happenings in years. And yet, the Chinese gaming industry is almost completely ignored. And that's why I'm here today to tell you, for multiple reasons, that this shouldn't be the case, and that this subject is more important than people think, and with the events of the last year, it's also more relevant. But before I can get into that, we're going to have to go through a little history lesson so I can get everyone up to speed. Don't worry, I'm a professional getter, up to speeder, and this history is worth it. China has a long, complicated and rather unusual relationship with gaming that most people are entirely unaware of. Sure, most people do have some vague ideas about gaming in China. The terms video games and China probably conjure images of knockoff products, pay-to-win online games, dubious megacorporations and chilling censorship. But there's a lot more to this story. It begins in the 80s. Following the death of Mao Zedong in 1976, the Chinese economy began to open up in a period that coincided with the rise of the home console. But the likes of Nintendo, Sega and Atari failed to make much inroad into the Chinese domestic market due to the high tariffs. In this period, all hardware and games had a 130% tax placed on them for being foreign imports, which meant the price of these systems was just too high for the average Chinese consumer. At the same time, however, the now infamous, incredibly lax intellectual property laws of the country meant a grey market quickly materialised, where popular consoles were reverse engineered and repackaged at drastically lower prices. The sale of these cloned consoles far outpaced all legitimate imports, meaning through piracy and knockoff productions, video games were still able to flourish. Until the 90s, where gaming faced a whole new challenge. Have you ever heard a parent complain about their child playing too much video games when they should be doing more productive endeavours like studying and being bored? Well, in the 90s, China took that sentiment and turned it up to 100. By the end of the 20th century, video games were regularly being referred to as digital heroin, with gaming being blamed for the contamination of spiritual civilization. If your child played games, it was thought they wouldn't be able to go to college or get a good job. Games were believed to sap one's spirit, and gaming addiction was a real worry. This situation probably wasn't helped by China's one-child policy, which meant many children grew up siblingless, with few activities outside school and no Cartoon Network equivalent, meaning playing games for hours on end must have been pretty appealing. But these fears weren't just limited to the domain of a few outspoken parents on some 20th century Chinese equivalent of Mumsnet. No, this anti-gaming sentiment was a major focus for national media, and in June of the year 2000, the Chinese government finally said, "Enough is enough, won't somebody think of the children?" before bravely stepping in to forever save the youth of China from this deadly corruption by banning the production, import and sale of all gaming consoles and arcade machines. This ban stayed in place until 2014, when a Chinese official was watching a game of League of Legends, where he witnessed a comeback pentakill in the 41st minute of the game, remarking, "Yo, that play was sick. What Korea can do, we can do better. Esports forever, let's corrupt some youths." And thus the Great Gaming ban was reversed, and 4 years later China won their first League of Legends World Championship. The official, who has since retired from public service, was once later confronted and asked how he felt about reintroducing so much corruption back into the youths, where he replied, "Worth, GGEs, report bot lane." Experts are still unsure what exactly he meant by this. Okay, part of that bit wasn't true. For starters, the console ban wasn't absolute, as some rare examples, like certain Nintendo handhelds rebranded by localization company IQ, were able to slip through the legislative net and make it into the legal Chinese market, although their success proved quite limited. More importantly, video games could still be played on PCs, with internet cafes becoming particularly popular, and while there were limitations on how much time children were allowed to spend at them, those internet cafes still flourished. As did online gaming, which ultimately led the government to introduce laws that required all online game publishers to incorporate anti-addiction software within their games that could limit how long underage players would spend on them. This software would monitor people's playtime, removing in-game currency from players who violated their play limits, while also forcing players to provide national identification to be able to create an online account, something that is still common practice to this day. Unsurprisingly, people found many ways around these measures, such as by using a parent's ID to create an account, and publishers didn't always comply with the requirements to begin with. And the grey market of Chinese reproduction still existed, people just had to be a bit more careful. Digital heroin or not, gaming in China was still on the ascendancy, and with the rise of mobile gaming at the end of the decade, that trend only continued. Consoles might have been irrelevant, but MMOs, social gaming, phone games, competitive multiplayer games, and so on all found welcome homes with Chinese audiences, and by 2014, with anti-gaming rhetoric likely softening with time, maybe because those once corrupted youths were now old enough to be calling some of the shots, the great console ban was officially lifted. Sort of. Gaming consoles were once more allowed, but they were subject to cultural inspections, meaning the online services that supported these consoles were gutted, and the number of games available was still greatly limited. This issue is further complicated by license requirements. To sell a game in China, that game needs a license to prove it complies with all Chinese regulation, but in mid-2018, the Chinese Ministry of Culture stopped issuing these licenses. This impacted some of the biggest games out there, with the likes of PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds and Fortnite not being allowed to be officially published in the region. In December 2018, the Chinese government formed the Online Game Ethics Committee to more strictly monitor and regulate all games published in China, but the new approval process proved slow, and a major backlog had already built up, which greatly impacted all who chose to publish games in the region, with the likes of Tencent, the previous biggest gaming company in the world, seeing their stock fall 40% during this period. As many people are aware, Chinese internet is heavily regulated and censored through a combination of technology and legislation commonly referred to as the Great Firewall of China. Examples of blocked websites include Google, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Wikipedia, and many, many others. Really, any place where information from outside China can be shared freely with people inside China is a problem. However, something that wasn't outright blocked was Steam. Why Steam wasn't blocked in China when so much else was, is a question I can't answer. In fact, it's a question almost no one can answer. Even experts who have done research related to the topic are unable to provide any explanation for why this is. To be clear, Steam hasn't just slipped past China's notice. The Steam service in China has been at least partly modified, with all community features being blocked, in addition to all games deemed to contain pornographic material being removed, but otherwise, Steam has always been easily accessible to Chinese audiences. And Chinese audiences certainly have accessed it. By December 2019, simplified Chinese had become the most common language on Steam, accounting for 37% of users. The thing you really need to understand here is that, in theory, Steam should never be allowed. After all, the strict license requirements that games are normally forced to adhere to were important enough to the Chinese government that it was willing to suspend licenses for all new games in 2018, costing the Chinese gaming industry billions and billions. but Steam allows publishers to completely bypass all of these requirements and the fees that go with them. Likewise, censorship is obviously a big deal in China, but Steam allows games a way around this, and plenty of games famously not allowed in China can be purchased just like any other on Steam storefront. Also, any foreign company that wants to operate in China generally needs a Chinese sponsor company. This is why Nintendo had partnered with iQue when it tried to bring its handhelds to China, but Steam has been able to operate all on its own for years. So, it's a genuine mystery why Steam has been allowed to operate in China all this time, and it's one that might shed light on the imperfections and unevenness of China's internet regulation. However, regardless of the reason why, the consequence hasn't just been more Chinese players accessing Western games. It's also allowed Chinese indie developers to make and sell games in and outside China. This is what might be referred to as a game changer, and the results have been impressive. More impressive than I think most people are aware of, which is how I came to realise that someone should probably make a video about it, and seeing as I'm not sure anyone else will, I guess that someone should probably be me. Fair warning though, I am in no way an expert on China. And so that is why I dedicated 1 month of my life to doing nothing but playing Chinese indie games. After all, playing games is what I do best, and how better to understand an incredibly complicated and nuanced subject matter than playing loads and loads of video games. So, I locked myself inside my house, which is kind of easy when your country's still in lockdown, and I ignored all social commitments, which is also kind of easy when you don't have any social commitments to begin with. But I'll have you know that even if I did have friends and wasn't locked down, I would have done the same. I also did my best to immerse myself in Chinese indie culture. I listened to interviews, I watched documentaries, as many as I could find, and I read research papers and news articles. Not as many as I could find